I'll never forget the moment I looked across the hall and saw my father sitting alone at my own wedding, pushed against the wall near the kitchen. It was as if someone had tried to make him disappear, to erase him from the very celebration he had sacrificed everything for. That was the moment something inside me began to shift. My name is Daniel Wright. I'm 31 years old. And for the past year, I thought I was building the life I'd always dreamed of, marrying Emily, the woman I believed was the love of my life. But standing there in that hall, tuxedo choking my throat, family and friends applauding, I realized that what looked perfect from the outside had cracks no one dared to see. My father, Richard Wright, is not a wealthy man. He never cared for titles or appearances. He's a carpenter. The kind of man who can fix a broken roof with his bare hands. The kind of man neighbors call when a storm rips through town because they know he'll show up. Growing up, I watched him live by a simple code. Help quietly, never ask for recognition. He carried himself with dignity even when money was tight and opportunities passed him by. But Emily and her family, they saw my father differently. To them, he was a man without status, someone who didn't belong in their glittering world. From the moment we announced our engagement, the comments began. Daniel, maybe your father should keep things simple on the wedding day. He's a good man, but perhaps he'll be more comfortable away from the spotlight. I told myself they didn't mean harm. I wanted to believe Emily loved me for who I was, not for the image her family wanted to protect. On the wedding day, the whispers turned into actions. While her relatives filled the front rows with polished shoes and expensive perfumes, my father was pointed toward a folding chair by the kitchen door. No tablecloth, no name card, just a plastic seat as if he were some uninvited guest who had slipped past the guards. I saw him hesitate for a second, his hands tightening around his old jacket. But then he lowered himself into that chair, his face calm, his eyes down. He didn't argue. He never does. That's who he is. The kind of man who swallows his pride to keep peace, even when he deserves far better. And I let it happen. That's the part that eats me alive. At that moment, I was still blind, still wrapped in Emily's careful web of reassurances that it's better this way and we don't want to cause a scene. I told myself my father didn't mind, that maybe he even preferred it. But deep down, a knot twisted in my chest. The music played, glasses clinked, people laughed, but all I could hear was the silence around my father, the empty chairs near him, the way no one met his eyes, as if his presence was an embarrassment. He sat there like a ghost at a celebration he had every right to stand proudly in. And that's when I felt it. The first crack in the illusion I'd been living in. Something inside me snapped, though I didn't yet know what to do with it. For the first time in months, I asked myself a question I'd been too afraid to face. If this is how my bride treats the man who raised me, what kind of marriage am I stepping into? Looking back now, I realize Emily's game had started long before the wedding day. At the time, I didn't see it. Or maybe I refused to see it. Love makes you blind, they say. And I was the perfect example. I thought I was marrying a woman who loved me for who I was. What I didn't understand was that she loved the version of me she could shape, the one that fit neatly into her family's polished world. It began with small comments, almost playful. Daniel, maybe don't wear those old boots when you come over for dinner. Dad likes people to look professional. Or do you really think your father will be comfortable at a big event like this? I laughed it off, told myself she was just nervous about impressions. My father never cared about appearances and maybe that embarrassed her a little. But embarrassment turned to criticism, and criticism turned to something darker. Shame. Emily had a way of planting doubts like seeds. I know you love your dad, but don't you think sometimes he holds you back? She'd say, her hands slipping into mine, her eyes soft with concern. You could do so much more if you weren't always tied down by him. She never raised her voice, never made it sound like an attack. Instead, she draped her words in silk, and I wore them like chains. Her family amplified the game. Dinners at her parents' house became quiet tests I didn't realize I was failing. Her father would ask about my job, always comparing it to someone else's son, who had a corner office and a six-figure salary. Her mother would smile politely at my father when he came to visit. But I noticed how quickly her eyes darted to his worn shoes, his calloused hands. I wanted to defend him, but Emily would squeeze my knee under the table, a silent reminder to stay quiet. Little by little, I stopped inviting my father to gatherings. I told myself it was to keep the peace, to avoid uncomfortable moments, but deep down, I was letting Emily rewrite the narrative of who my father was. She painted him as small, outdated, someone to be hidden away. And I, God help me, I believed her. By the time the wedding planning began, she had perfected the script. Seating charts suddenly placed her family front and center, while mine was pushed to the side. Choices about music, food, even the officiant were steered in her direction. When I asked about costs, she told me her parents were taking care of everything. It was a lie I swallowed whole, too distracted to question. The breaking point should have been the conversation about the ceremony. I remember asking if my father would walk with me at some point or at least be acknowledged. Emily smiled sweetly and said, "Daniel, this isn't about your father. This is about us. Don't complicate things. Don't complicate things." That phrase became her weapon, her shield. Every time I pushed back, she used it to silence me. And I let her. I told myself she was right, that maybe tradition wasn't important, that maybe my father didn't need recognition to be proud of me. But on the wedding day, when I saw him seated alone by the kitchen, the words twisted in my mind, "Don't complicate things. Don't stand up for him. Don't honor the man who gave up everything for me." And in that instant, those words no longer sounded like love. They sounded like control. As I watched Emily laughing with her bridesmaids, dazzling in her gown, I felt the first hint of something I had never dared to feel before. Suspicion. Not just that she didn't respect my father, but that she didn't respect me either. And then it hit me. Sharp as a blade. If she could convince me to ignore the man who raised me, what else had she convinced me to ignore? I told myself the feeling in my chest was just nerves, the kind every groom has on his wedding day. Maybe that was true, but deep down I knew it was something else. It was the weight of silence pressing on me. A silence I had carried for months while Emily's voice filled every corner of my mind. All around me, the hall buzzed with energy. Glasses clinked. Laughter spilled from every table and cameras flashed as her family posed like they owned the night. And maybe they did. The whole event felt like it had been built for them. Their image, their pride, their name. I was the groom. Yet somehow, I felt like a guest in a celebration that wasn't mine. Still, I tried to convince myself that this was love, that Emily's polished world was the future, and my father's humble way of life was the past. She had whispered it so many times that I started to believe it. "Daniel, you need to think about where you're going, not where you came from." I nodded, smiled, and let the words sink into me like anchors. So when I saw my father sitting in that chair by the kitchen, isolated and ignored, I did what I had learned to do. I looked away. I told myself he didn't care. I told myself he was fine, that maybe he even preferred it that way. It was easier than admitting the truth, that I had failed him. From across the room, I watched Emily. Her laughter was effortless. Her smile dazzling. She looked like everything I had once dreamed of. The perfect bride in a perfect setting. But the longer I looked, the more I felt something shift. Her beauty no longer seemed warm. It felt sharp like glass catching the light. Dazzling, but dangerous if you touched it. I tried to push the thought aside, but my eyes betrayed me. They kept drifting back to my father. He sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands resting quietly on his knees. He didn't eat, didn't drink. He simply existed in that corner, as though his presence was a burden the room had decided to ignore. Every laugh I heard around me sounded louder, crueler. Every clink of a glass echoed like a reminder of what had been taken from him, from us. My father deserved to sit at the head table to be honored as the man who raised me. Instead, he had been reduced to a shadow in a room filled with lights. And I was too blind to stop it. The truth gnawed me with every passing minute. I remembered the times my father had patched my jeans because we couldn't afford new ones. The nights he skipped dinner so I could have a full plate. The mornings he left before sunrise, his hands already raw from the work waiting for him. He had given me everything, and I had given him silence. Emily caught my gaze and smiled as if nothing was wrong. She looked radiant, untouchable, the queen of the night. For a moment, I almost let her smile pull me back into the illusion. Almost. But then my father lifted his head just slightly, and our eyes met. It wasn't anger I saw there. It wasn't disappointment. It was something worse. It was sadness. And in that split second, something inside me cracked again, deeper this time. Because if this was what love looked like, then why did it feel so much like betrayal? The moment my father's eyes met mine, the noise of the wedding faded. The clinking glasses, the laughter, even Emily's radiant voice. It all blurred into a dull hum. All I could see was him. My father, Richard Wright, the man who had carried me on his shoulders when I was a boy, an afterthought at my own wedding. Something inside me snapped. Up until that moment, I had lived inside the world Emily built for me, polished, scripted, flawless on the surface. She had convinced me my father was too simple, that I needed to rise above his shadow. And I believed her because I wanted to, because I thought love meant trusting her vision more than my own instincts. But seeing him there, alone, dishonored, ripped the blindfold from my eyes. For the first time, I saw Emily clearly. She was beautiful, yes, but her beauty no longer blinded me. It was cold, calculated, the kind that draws people in only to control them. The smile she wore as she mingled with her family looked like a performance carefully rehearsed. And I realized I was just another part of her performance. This wasn't love. This was strategy. A wave of shame crashed over me so heavy it nearly took my breath away. I thought of the months leading up to this day. The dinners where I stayed quiet while my father was diminished. The choices I surrendered because she told me it was for the best. I thought of every time I saw doubt in my father's eyes but ignored it. Every time I told myself he didn't mind, I had betrayed him. And worse, I had betrayed myself. As Emily turned to glance at me across the room, our eyes met. She smiled, that same dazzling, perfect smile. And for the first time, it made me sick because I knew what was behind it now. Control, manipulation, a hunger for status that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with appearances. The weight of it all pressed down on me. This marriage wasn't just a mistake. It was a trap, and I had walked straight into it, blindfolded and smiling. My hands trembled as I reached for my glass of champagne, but I couldn't bring myself to drink. The bubbles fizzled against the rim, mocking me with their celebration. Across the room, my father lowered his gaze again, as if to shield me from the pain I had caused him. That small gesture, that quiet dignity, broke me. I couldn't stay silent any longer, not after everything he had done for me, not after everything she had taken from me. My mind raced, desperate for a way out. I could walk to the microphone and tell the truth. I could confront Emily in front of everyone. I could tear down the illusion her family had built around us. But each thought felt reckless, messy, like swinging wildly in the dark. What I needed was something undeniable, something no one, not Emily, not her family, not even myself, could twist into another lie. And as my eyes roamed the room, searching for an answer, I saw him, the mayor, sitting just a few tables away, his expression calm, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. And in that moment, I remembered years ago when the storm ripped half the town apart, my father had shown up at the mayor's doorstep. The roof was collapsing, the rain pouring in, and my father fixed it with his own two hands. He asked for nothing in return. Now here we were, my father, humiliated in silence, the mayor seated among the guests, and me, finally awake to the truth. The pieces began to align in my mind, sharp and clear. Maybe this was how I could show them all who my father really was. My chest tightened as the weight of the truth pressed down on me. The wedding music played on, cheerful and hollow, but inside I was unraveling. My father had been humiliated. I had been blind. And Emily had orchestrated it all with a smile. Now I was awake. But what good was awakening if I just stood there paralyzed? I tried to imagine what to do. The first thought was to walk straight to the microphone, take it from the MC's hands, and tell everyone the truth. To strip away the lies, to point to my father, and declare what he had done, who he really was. But the image faltered in my mind. Emily's family would dismiss it as drama, call me unstable, turn my words into another story about a groom who lost control. I considered confronting Emily herself, right there at the center of the room under the chandeliers. I could expose her manipulation, force her to admit what she had done. But I knew how sharp her tongue was, how quickly she could twist words. She would smile, deny, laugh it off. And in front of that crowd, I would look like a jealous fool. Another thought struck me. I could grab my father's hand, pull him from that chair by the kitchen, and walk him to the center of the room myself, to stand with him shoulder to shoulder, where he belonged. For a moment, I almost rose from my chair to do it, but fear stopped me. Not fear of Emily, not fear of her family, but fear that it wouldn't be enough. That they would still look at him and see only what they wanted. A poor man who didn't belong. The ideas churned in my head like waves crashing against rocks. None of them felt right. None of them felt like justice. And then, like a flicker in the corner of my eye, I saw him again. The mayor. He was seated just a few tables away, relaxed, unaware of the storm raging inside me. But in that instant, his presence lit a spark in my mind. My father had helped him once years ago when the storm nearly tore his home apart. My father had been the one to climb that roof, drenched in rain, nailing it back together so the mayor's children could sleep safely that night. The memory struck me hard. The mayor owed his comfort to the very man now sitting alone in the shadows of my wedding. My pulse quickened. Could it work? Could he be the one to speak to reveal what Emily and her family had tried to bury? I hesitated, my hand trembling near my phone. What if he refused? What if he didn't even remember? What if Emily twisted it into another story about me seeking attention? But then my father shifted in his chair, his shoulders heavier than I had ever seen them. That sight pierced through every doubt. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about him, about giving him the honor he deserved, even if it shattered everything else around me. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, my mind racing. How do you even begin a message like that? Mr. Mayor, please help me. Sir, my father deserves more. No words seemed enough. Finally, with my heart hammering against my ribs, I typed a single line. Short, urgent, true. I hit send. Across the room, the mayor's phone lit up. He glanced down, then lifted his eyes to meet mine. And in that moment, I knew the silence of the night was about to break. The room was alive with noise, but inside me, everything had gone still. I had sent the message, and all I could do was wait. My phone felt heavy in my hand, the glow of the screen fading as the text disappeared into the air between us. Across the tables, the mayor looked down at his phone, then up at me. For a moment, his face was unreadable. The clinking of glasses, the chatter of guests, Emily's laughter, it all blurred as I focused only on him. Our eyes locked. It wasn't a long stare, but it was enough. He knew. I remembered that night years ago when a storm had split the sky open, tearing through our small town. Trees fell, power lines snapped, and rain hammered roofs until they collapsed. I was a teenager then, standing barefoot in the mud, watching my father grab his tool belt and head out into the chaos. The applause finally began to soften, but the energy in the room had irrevocably changed. The air, once thick with pretense, now felt electric with raw, unfiltered truth. All eyes were fixed on my father and me, standing together in the center of the dance floor that was meant for a first dance that would now never happen. My father's hand on my shoulder was firm, a grounding weight after months of feeling utterly adrift. He leaned in close, his voice a low, gravelly whisper meant only for me. Daniel, he said, his eyes shimmering. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did, I said, my own voice thick with an emotion I could no longer contain. I should have done it a long time ago. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Emily was on her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. The dazzling smile was gone, completely erased and replaced with a mask of cold, pure fury. She began to stride toward us, her gown swishing with a violent, angry sound. Her parents rose too, their faces etched with a horror that had nothing to do with compassion and everything to do with social ruin. But before she could reach us, before she could unleash the storm I saw brewing in her eyes, the mayor stepped forward again, placing himself subtly between her path and us. He didn't confront her, he simply stood there, a wall of quiet authority. He nodded to the bandleader, who, taking the cue, struck up a soft, classic melody. It wasn't our chosen song. It was something older, timeless. The mayor turned back to my father and me. "A dance," he said, not as a suggestion, but as a statement. For a father and his son. The guests understood. This was the new script. This was the correction. A path opened up on the dance floor, and my father, after a moment's hesitation, gave my shoulder a final squeeze and led me into the space. We stood there awkwardly for a second, two men not accustomed to this kind of display. And then we danced. It was clumsy, a few simple steps, but it was the most honest moment of the entire evening. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer heavy, it was healing. The entire room watched, many with tears in their eyes. This was the heart of the celebration, the connection that should have been honored from the beginning. I glanced over my father's shoulder. Emily had stopped dead in her tracks, utterly frozen. She was surrounded by her family, but she looked completely alone. She was witnessing a moment of genuine love and respect, and she had no place in it. She had engineered every detail of this night to exclude this very thing, and now it was the centerpiece. The illusion of her perfect world wasn't just cracked, it had been shattered, and the pieces were reflecting a truth she could no longer manipulate. The song ended. Another round of applause, warmer this time, more heartfelt, filled the hall. My father clapped me on the back, a proud, solid thump that said more than words ever could. That's when I knew it was over. The performance was done. I looked directly at Emily, and for the first time, I held her gaze without flinching, without doubting myself. I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. She knew I was gone. I turned my back on the glittering tables, the extravagant flowers, the woman in the white dress. I walked with my father, not toward the exit in a dramatic rush, but slowly, with purpose, stopping to shake the hands of guests who reached out to us and my guests, our friends and family who had finally been given a voice. We walked out of the main hall together, side by side, into the cool, quiet night. The door swung shut behind us, muffling the noise of the party that was now forever in the past. We stood there under the stars, the two of us, and took a deep breath of the free air. The wedding was over. But for the first time that day, I felt like I was just beginning, the sound of a car door closing, then the gentle rumble of an engine starting. The luxurious, stifling ambience of the wedding reception is replaced by the humble, familiar interior of my father's old pickup truck. We didn't speak for the first few miles. The only sounds were the hum of the engine, the whisper of the tires on the asphalt, and the distant, fading echo of the reception music that still seemed to haunt the inside of my skull. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one a stark reminder of the life I was now driving away from. My father finally broke the silence, his voice quiet and steady, not pushing. "Where to, Dan?" The question hung in the air. I didn't have an answer. My apartment, the one I shared with Emily, was filled with her things, her choices, the ghost of her expectations. It wasn't a home, it was a showroom for a life that wasn't mine. "Anywhere but there," I said, my voice rough. "Just drive." He nodded, his eyes on the road. He understood the need for motion, for putting physical distance between yourself and a catastrophe. After another long stretch of quiet, he spoke again. "You know, your mother would have been proud of you tonight." The mention of my mom, gone for over a decade, was a fresh ache. She was the one who had always seen the best in my father, who had loved his quiet strength. She would have seen right through Emily from the start. "I didn't do anything to be proud of," I said, the shame returning in a cold wave. "I just stopped doing the wrong thing. After months of doing it." He glanced over at me, his profile outlined by the dashboard lights. "Stopping a wrong thing is its own kind of right thing, Daniel. It takes a different kind of courage." We drove past the city limits, the lights growing
We were cleaning the tools, brushing sawdust and grit from the blades, the rhythmic, mundane task of bomb. Each buzz of the phone was a tiny crack in the peace we'd built all morning. My father would pause, look over at my discarded jacket where the phone lay, then back at me, saying nothing. The buzzing stopped. Started again. Stopped. A new sound, the crunch of gravel under tires, too fast, too aggressive for this quiet street. A sleek, silver car, Emily's car, screeched to a halt behind my father's truck. The door flew open. She emerged, and it was a shocking sight. This wasn't the composed, radiant bride from the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face devoid of makeup, pale and tight with a fury I'd never seen. She was still in her sweats, a sharp contrast to the manicured perfection of the Jenkins lawn. She didn't even look at the house. Her eyes locked onto me, standing there in a flannel shirt smudged with tar, a hammer in my hand. "What the hell are you doing, Daniel?" Her voice was a strangled shriek, cutting through the morning calm. Birds fell silent. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you've done?" My father very slowly, very deliberately, set down the saw he was oiling. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak. He just became a presence, a steady rock in the face of her crashing wave. I placed my hammer on the workbench. "I'm working, Emily," I said, my voice calm, surprising me. It sounded like my father's. "Working," she spat the word out like it was poison. "You humiliate me? You humiliate my family? You walk out on your own wedding and you're working?" She took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "My father is on the phone with the partners right now. Your career is over, Daniel. Do you understand that? Over." I felt the words like a physical blow, but they didn't land with the force she intended. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was distant. The reality of the shingles, the blisters on my palms, the quiet solidarity of my father, it all felt more real than the threat of a corner office I never really wanted. "I understand," I said. She stared at me, incredulous, waiting for more. For begging, for apologies, for the collapse she was so sure was coming. When it didn't, her anger twisted into something colder, more venomous. "This," she said, gesturing wildly at the roof, the tools, my father. "This is what you want? You're choosing this? You're going to throw everything away for a life of manual labor and poverty?" That's when my father moved. Not toward her. He walked to the passenger side of her car, which was still running. He reached in and turned off the ignition, pocketing the keys with a quiet, final click. He wasn't being aggressive. He was being practical. She was too upset to drive. The action, so simple and calm, seemed to infuriate her even more. She whirled on him. "You," she seethed. "This is all your fault. You and your quiet little guilt trips. You couldn't stand to see him happy, could you? You couldn't stand to see him have a life better than this." My father didn't flinch. He met her gaze, his own steady. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and even, devoid of anger. It was the tone he used with unreasonable clients. "You need to leave now." "Don't you ma'am me," she screamed. She turned back to me, her eyes pleading now, a desperate act. "Daniel, please. Come home. We can fix this. We'll get counseling. We'll tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, a nervous breakdown. People will understand. Just get in the car. Please." She was offering me the door back into the gilded cage. All I had to do was agree that the truth was a lie, that my awakening was a breakdown, that my father's honor was a fault. I looked at her, really looked at her. The manipulation was so transparent now, laid bare in the harsh morning light. I saw the life she was offering, a life of constant apology, of shrinking myself to fit, of quiet shame. I picked up the hammer again. Not as a threat, but as a statement. This was my choice. "No, Emily," I said, the words final. "I am home." The fight drained out of her. The performance was over.
She looked from me to my father, her expression shifting from fury to a pure, unadulterated contempt. She saw it clearly now, she had lost. Not to another woman, but to a principal. To a man with calloused hands and a quiet code she would never understand. Without another word, she snatched her keys from my father's outstretched hand, got in her car, and spun the tires, spraying gravel as she sped away. The silence she left behind was heavy, but it wasn't broken. It was whole. My father walked over, picked up a shingle, and handed it to me. "Rose getting away from us," he said. I took it. We went back to work. We finished the row in silence, the encounter with Emily already feeling like a distant, feverish dream. The reality was the grain of the wood, the weight of the shingle, the satisfying thump of a nail-driven flush. My mind, which had been a roaring ocean for months, was now a still lake, reflecting only the task at hand. The crunch of gravel came again, but this time it was slower, hesitant. An older sedan, not a sleek import, pulled in behind the truck. The door opened and Mr. Jenkins stepped out, but he wasn't alone. An older woman, his wife, was with him, holding a large, lidded pot. And behind them, in a beat-up van I recognized, was Old Man Miller from 2 streets over. My father paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm. "Morning, Bill." "Martha," he said, nodding. Mr. Jenkins looked up at us on the roof. "Heard you might have a bigger crew today, Richard," he said, his voice carrying a note of quiet purpose. Before my father could answer, another truck pulled in. Then a car. Within 10 minutes, the Jenkins driveway and the street in front of it were filled with a small fleet of vehicles that had never seen a valet. Men and women I'd known my whole life, neighbors, guys my dad played cards with, the owner of the local hardware store, were climbing out, pulling work gloves from their pockets. They didn't come with questions. They didn't come with gossip. They came with tools. They came with a stack of pizzas from the local shop. They came with a giant thermos of lemonade. I stood there on the roof, hammer in hand, utterly bewildered. My father looked out at the gathering crowd, and for the first time that day, I saw his composure break. Just for a second. His jaw tightened, and he blinked rapidly, looking down at the shingles. He took a deep, steadying breath. Old Man Miller set up a sawhorse without being asked. Martha Jenkins started papering plates with pizza slices. The hardware store owner started organizing the extra bundles of shingles into a more efficient line. My father finally found his voice. "Appreciate it, everyone," he called down, his voice rough with an emotion he wouldn't name. "But we've got it. No need to put yourselves out." Pete, the mechanic from the garage down the road, grinned up at us. "Shut up, Richard. You're holding up the line. We're losing daylight." He tossed a pair of gloves up to me. "Your city boy hands look soft, Danny. Let's see if you remember how to do an honest day's work." And that was that. Ladders went up. The roof, which had felt so vast and solitary with just the two of us, was suddenly alive with the sounds of a dozen hammers, the easy, joking banter of people who had known each other for decades. They worked around me, not with pity, but with a simple, unspoken inclusion. They teased me about my form, offered unsolicited advice, and passed me nails. I was passed a plate of pizza and a cup of lemonade. I sat on the ridge cap, surrounded by this makeshift, unasked-for community, and I understood. This was the mayor's speech, translated into action. This was their answer to the glittering, exclusionary world of the country club. They weren't just shingling a roof. They were building a wall around one of their own. They were building a wall around me. The work that would have taken my father and me 2 more days was done by sundown. The new roof was a perfect, unbroken expanse of gray, solid, and weatherproof. As the crew packed up, slapping my father on the back, nodding to me, Mr. Jenkins handed my dad an envelope. "For the materials," he said. Then he pressed a second, thicker envelope into his hand. "And a little extra. For the crew." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. It was for us. They left as quietly as they had come, leaving behind a spotless yard and the lingering smell of sawdust and pizza. My father and I were alone again, the new roof solid beneath our feet. The evening was quiet, the air cool. He looked at the envelope in his hand, then at the finished work. "You see," he said, his voice quiet in the twilight. "You spend a lifetime building things for people, you never have to build anything alone." He didn't mean the roof. We stood in the quiet of the Jenkins yard, the new roof a dark, sleek cap against the house. The kind of quiet that settles after a job well done, a shared effort. My father tucked the envelope into his back pocket without looking at it. It wasn't about the money. It was about the weight of it. A tangible measure of the respect that had just been shown. He turned to me, his face etched with fatigue but also a deep, unshakable contentment. "Hungry?" he asked. It was the most normal question in the world. "Starving," I said, and I was. The pizza had been hours ago. "Your place or mine," he said, a faint grin touching his lips. It was an old joke from when I was a kid, when my place was just my bedroom down the hall. I almost said mine out of habit. But the image of my apartment, the minimalist furniture Emily had chosen, the art that meant nothing to me, the fridge full of her health-conscious groceries, felt like a museum of a life I was no longer living. It was a place to be dismantled, not a place to eat. "Yours," I said. "Definitely yours." We drove back to the workshop in a comfortable silence. This time, it felt different. The space between us wasn't filled with the ghosts of the wedding or the shock of my decision. It was just space. It was okay to be quiet in it. He didn't make coffee. He went to the small fridge in the corner and pulled out 2 cold beers, the local kind with a label I recognized from the bar where he and his friends went on Fridays. He popped the tops with a flick of his wrist and handed me one. Then he went to the hot plate. Not for coffee. He pulled out a cast-iron skillet, the one that had seen 1,000 meals. He got eggs, cheese, and a few leftover slices of bacon from the pizza party. The sizzle of the bacon hitting the hot pan was a better sound than any string quartet that had played at the reception. I sat on a stool by the workbench, sipping my beer, watching him cook. He moved with the same economy of motion he used for woodworking. No wasted effort. This was his domain. His world. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly in it. Not just visiting. He slid a loaded plate of food in front of me and sat opposite me with his own. We ate. No one spoke. The only sounds were our forks on the plates and the occasional hum of the old fluorescent light overhead. Halfway through the meal, he nodded toward my jacket, still lying on the chair where my phone was buzzing its final, dying buzzes. "You gonna turn that thing on?" I took a long swallow of beer. "Tomorrow," I said. He gave a single, approving nod. "Tomorrow's good." We finished eating. He took the plates to the small sink and started washing them. I picked up my phone. The screen was an avalanche of notifications, dozens of missed calls from Emily, her parents, numbers I didn't recognize. A blizzard of text messages, some furious, some pleading, some no doubt from colleagues who had heard the news. I didn't open any of them. I held down the power button until the screen went black. Then I pulled out the SIM card. I walked over to the metal trash can by the door, dropped the card inside, and heard it hit the bottom with a tiny, final click. My father finished drying the last plate and put it away. He didn't comment on what I'd just done. He didn't need to. He looked around the workshop, then at me. "Couch is yours as long as you need it," he said. "But tomorrow, we start on the Gunderson's shed. It's a bigger job. Sun comes up at 5:30, I corrected him. A real smile, the first one I'd seen since before the wedding, broke across his face. 5:30, he agreed. He turned out the main light, leaving us in the dim glow of the exit sign over the door. He headed toward the small bedroom in the back. I lay down on the old sofa, pulling the wool blanket over me. It smelled like him. It smelled like home. Outside, the world I had left behind was spinning on without me, full of noise and consequence. But in here, there was only the solid, silent truth of a day's work done, a full stomach, and the promise of another one at dawn. For the first night in a year, I didn't dream of a future I was supposed to want. I slept. My eyes opened.
The deep, dreamless sleep vanished instantly. The pre-dawn gloom of the workshop was a pale, grayish blue. My father was already moving in the back room. I heard his footsteps, then the soft click of the lock on the main door. I sat up on the sofa, the wool blanket falling to my waist. The air was cold. He opened the door just a crack. Standing there, silhouetted against the streetlight, was a woman. She was older, her posture straight but weary, dressed in a simple, expensive coat. It was Eleanor, Emily's mother. My father didn't open the door wider. He stood in the gap, blocking the view inside. "Eleanor," he said, his voice neutral, flat. It wasn't a greeting. It was an identification. "Richard," her voice was strained, stripped of its usual social grace. I need to speak with Daniel. Please. He's sleeping. It's important. So is sleep." A beat of silence. I could feel her frustration, her humiliation at having to come to this place. "This isn't a social call," she said, her voice tightening. "What he did, the scene he caused. The repercussions are significant." "I imagine they are," my father said, his tone still impossibly calm. "My husband is on the phone with the firm's senior partners as we speak. Daniel's position is untenable. His career, everything he's worked for, it's gone. Do you understand that? He's throwing it all away." Her words were meant to be a threat, a final warning. They sounded hollow in the crisp morning air, against the backdrop of my father's silence. "He made a choice," my father said. "A catastrophic one," she insisted, her composure cracking. "Influenced by you. This display of yours with the mayor. It was a calculated humiliation." Finally, my father's voice changed. It didn't get louder. It got quieter, harder, like iron cooling. "No, Eleanor. The humiliation was seating a good man by the kitchen door. The rest was just truth. And truth has a way of making calculated people uncomfortable." I could almost feel her flinch on the other side of the door. "He'll regret this," she said, and now her voice was a whisper, cold and sharp. "When the novelty wears off. When he's broke and alone. He'll come crawling back. And we may not be so generous then." It was the final card in her deck. The threat of withdrawn privilege. My father was silent for a long moment. I could picture him just looking at her, his gaze steady. "Are you finished?" he asked. The question was so simple, so utterly dismissive, it seemed to suck all the air out of her argument. She had nothing left. "This isn't over," she said, but the words had no force behind them. "It is for us," my father said. He closed the door. The soft click of the lock engaging was louder than any slam could have been. I heard her heels on the gravel, quick and sharp, then the sound of a car door and an engine starting, moving away fast. He stood there for a minute, his back to me, looking at the closed door. Then he turned around. He didn't look surprised to see me awake. He just nodded toward the percolator, already beginning to gurgle on the hot plate. "Get dressed," he said, his voice back to its normal, rough warmth. "The Gunderson's shed won't build itself." He didn't mention her visit. He didn't ask me if I'd heard. He had handled it. It was already part of the past. The coffee began to brew, its rich, bitter scent filling the workshop, erasing the last trace of her expensive perfume. I got up and pulled on the work clothes from the day before. They were stiff with dried sweat and smelled of pine tar and honest labor. They smelled like freedom.